Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keith Whalen from RPI Consultants. I want to thank you for taking the time to attend this project on 10 do-it-yourself projects to get you ready for the wonderful future of global HR. We're going to take a couple of minutes before we get started. We have a lot of folks signing on, but we do very much appreciate your patience. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, my name is Keith Whalen from RPI Consultants. I'm here with our HCM practice manager, Ms. Melissa Olson, and Ms. Jackie Dudas, one of our HCM consultants. And they've done a lot of presentations, so hopefully you've seen some of them before. A lot of global HR and talent over the years. But here today, we're focusing on things to do with your current S3 system to put you in a better position both to get ready for global HR and to take advantage of some of the stuff that you should be looking at anyway, no matter what your path forward is. Two quick housekeeping notes before I hand it off. One, we will be recording this webinar. It takes us 7 to 10 business days to get it rendered and put on YouTube. And we'll email you a link once that's done. And also, we encourage questions. Just type them into the GoToMeeting, and we'll try to answer them throughout. It helps sort of break up the presentation and make it less of a total data dump, and we can, have more of a conversation. And with that, I give you Ms. Jackie Dudas, Ms. Melissa Olson.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
So welcome, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about some awesome projects you can do in S3 to prepare your system for global HR. These are all projects that you can do yourself. You could hire someone to help you with, but these are all things that you could work on today that will hopefully shorten your implementation time when you move forward with global HR. A lot of these things we usually spend time cleaning these up as we implement global HR, but if you get this ready, it'll take much less time during the implementation process. And it's a little spooky in this presentation. We have a little theme of old classic movies, so hopefully you've seen them enough that they're not so scary anymore. Vintage. Yes.
Yes. We might scare you here and there.
Yeah.
About us, we are a full-service Infor Lawson implementation partner. We are an alliance partner with Infor, and we're based out of Baltimore. So we've been in the space since 1999. We've got a lot of seasoned consultants, and they're all over the country now. We've kind of spread our fingers across the West. I represent the West now, and it's been a while since we've had anybody west of the Mississippi, but we're moving that way. So,
yeah. And we
shout out to all you Cali.
Yeah, West Coast. We are in Baltimore, so in our last webinar we had a little bit of jackhammering going on. You might hear some sirens, so please pardon any noise if you do hear any background noise.
Hopefully no gunshots.
Yeah. So here's our agenda for today. First, we're going to hit some differences between S3 and global HR. Maybe you've never seen global HR. Maybe you're not really sure some of the terminology we're using. Hopefully we'll cover that in our first couple slides. And then these are the projects or kind of tasks that you can go through as you're prepping, as you're getting ready for global HR. So the first thing I want to talk about are some structural differences. So over here on the left-hand side, we have S3, and then over on the right-hand side, we have the equivalent in global HR. The first thing is your HR11 employee record in S3. That becomes your resource record in global HR. So in global HR, you not only have the capability to track employees, you can also track students, volunteers, contractors, anyone that's working for your organization, even if they're not on the payroll. So that becomes a general term, the resource record, but it still works as your HR11 as well, still holds all that information on that employee. Your company, process level, and department become your organization and organization units. So your company would equate to your organization, and then any levels below that would become organization units for which you can define levels, and you aren't just limited to those two levels of process level and department. You can use infinity organization units. So
nest up through.
Exactly. So I'm working with someone right now who's inserted a level of division. So they have their company, process level, division, and department in there. So you're not just limited to the structure that's in S3. Your job and position, you're still going to create jobs and positions in global HR, but once they get assigned to the resource record, they're going to be work assignments. So instead of referring to an employee's position, you're going to refer to their work assignment. Your status breaks out into 3 components in global HR. You have your relationship to org, your relationship status, and your work type. So these are user defined. You can define these yourself. The relationship to org would be your employee, your student, your contractor. The status is active or inactive or on leave. And then the work type is part-time, full-time, whatever. So you can define these yourself, and all together these make up the status.
So what that also helps with is if you want to send certain data elements over back to your payroll, back to your S3 system. Now you've broken up your status in a manner that you're able to send only the employees that you need. So maybe you can say, I want every employee, but I only want those with relationship status of active, and I only want, or active and maybe leave, and I only want the work type of part-time maybe. So instead of having to use A1 plus A3 plus L2 plus however you break down your statuses right now, and you try and group them to either report or manipulate the data in them, this allows you to be able to do that a lot easier, send it back and forth through the interface. And we're just kind of giving you a little bit of an update because we might be hitting these terms later on through the presentation with the projects.
And then lastly here, we just have the supervisor. In S3, you have your supervisors and your indirect supervisors. You get that as well in Global HR, but you also get multiple different types of supervisors, which Melissa will go into a little bit later. But the main supervisor that you know in S3 relates or equates to the direct supervisor role in Global HR.
Okay, so some of the functional differences that you'll see and that we're going to be talking about through the presentation are your personal actions right now will become action requests. They're out of the box, delivered, main requests that you, or main actions that you normally do. And there's 5. There's a hire, a rehire, termination, position change or transfer, and a pay change. And when we talk about actions and reasons, we're going to get further into why there's only those 5, and if you have more than 5, maybe you shouldn't, because you'll be mapping them back to these action requests. Your manager self-service and employee self-service are also still there. They're called manager space and employee space in some versions. They're starting to move back to the naming convention of self-services, so it's kind of interchangeable on the version 11 side. Your employee groups are now going to be called custom groups. You will need to do some significant cleanup, which we'll talk about, so that way you'll know how to order and create the groups to use for different elements of the system. Your HR 10 in your current S3 system is where you'll find all of your history reporting, or not reporting, but just your history inquiry. You're not able to track that many fields. You determine what fields that are tracked through history. In Global HR, everything is tracked. Every field, every change, every reversal, all of that is tracked. So you'll have a lot more reporting capability and nothing kind of slips through the system without you knowing who did it and when it was done. And in S3, we have no concept of as of dating or a point in time in our system, being able to inquire a point in time, which we'll now be able to do in version 11. You'll be able to turn your system date back 6 months and see what your head count looked like at that point, or forward 3 months to see who's going to be starting and what, if you need to get ready orientation packets or anything for your new hires. So that is a really cool concept that has moved to the new
Very
system.
exciting functionality.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. So some of the decisions that you want to make, and Jackie was talking about earlier, these are projects that will help you cut time out of your implementation. So generally, your first few weeks, your first 3 to 4 weeks of design, there are all these organizational decisions have to be made. And a lot of times the people that are in the room that are doing the implementation aren't generally the ones that can make those decisions for the whole organization. So if you start talking about these things now, start talking about them with your leadership and the sponsor to the project, with the board, with if you've got affiliates, what kind of standardization you can do. All of those decisions that you make now will really shorten the time in that build and design process. We have a current client right now that you guys are ahead of the game because they had already done all this homework.
They took initiative and did a lot of the org structure discussions on their own, figured out what modules they wanted, so they really saved themselves a lot of time in the implementation role.
Yeah. So what modules do you want? And you can think about that in what are your drivers for these modules. Maybe it would be nice to have performance and goal, but if you have a 3-year contract with another third party, maybe that's not phase 1. Maybe phase 1 is just global HR. So if you phase out what modules will make sense to your business process and what your organization needs, or what what contracts are ending, what you want to sunset. Those will help you determine what phase 1, phase 2, and potentially future phases will look like. I think you want to talk about the org structure?
Oh, sure. So the org structure, like I said, if you can determine this kind of, or even get the talk started, maybe you don't have to determine it yet, but kind of think about, maybe you're tracking something offline. Maybe you have this division that you have your departments roll up to, but you're not able to track that in S3, but you kind of manipulate a spreadsheet once you dump it out and out of S3. Think about what you might want to put into DHR to automatically do those roll-ups for you. So if you have anything that exists like that, or if you thought, well, we couldn't do it because there's no place for it in S3, but we've always wanted to have this additional level, you can do it now in Global HR. So start to talk about what's going to be a department, what's going to stay a department in the future. And in addition, you need to figure out, if you have multiple lines of business, whether you're going to implement them as one company, which is likely that you've done in S3. And if you have done that in S3, I would recommend just moving that one company over. If you do have separate companies in S3, we can visit that and see maybe it would be best to consolidate them. Maybe you're transferring people between those companies and you really have to term and then rehire them. Maybe you really should be transferring them. So you can look at that too and determine if there's business drivers that should keep your companies separate, or if you should actually consolidate them into one company.
History is another decision that would be nice if you could make before you start your implementation. Because when you go out there to request a proposal, SOW, RFP, any of those things, history it's a lot of work. And if it's 1 year of history, your proposal is going to be a lot less than what 10 years or all of your history is going to look like. A lot of people might say, we don't do that, it's not best practice. Anybody can bring over as much history as you need. You just have to be willing to either, if you don't want to expand that timeline, bring more resources on. If you don't want to expand that budget, do a lot of that yourself with the guidance or direction of your implementation partner. But generally what we see is, you're bringing over about a year, because that could correspond with your payroll year or maybe your GL year, and you would bring over your terminated people with not a work assignment, so you wouldn't try and create the history of who their supervisor was and what they did before they left, but just have a record for them so you're aware, if they are rehired, that they're a rehire and not a new hire. They're in your system as a converted employee. Am I missing anything else here? I'm trying to think. You want to bring over at least your supervisors and your positions for your oldest I don't want to say your oldest employee, but your employee that's worked there the longest, the longest tenure. So you ensure all of that has been built out.
And you can create like a dummy position or supervisor. So like the supervisor would actually be called conversion supervisor or go live supervisor, just to have on their record, so that you don't have to bring in a ton of old, irrelevant, obsolete data. Just to store that history in there. If you are coming from S3, you will still have to be maintaining S3 and using S3 moving forward with payroll. Right. So just think of it, you're not going to lose everything that you have in S3. You're still going to be able to go there and query and look for things in S3. But really the main driver behind bringing your history into Global HR is for reporting purposes. So anytime you need to look back, just think about how far you need to look back and how difficult that might be if you're leaving some things in Global HR or in S3 that just happened a year ago. So your main driver is really your reporting, but you will still be able to access things that occurred in S3.
And when S3 finally does sunset, when they move payroll over, at that point you would dump all of that data into some sort of database or data warehouse. So you could still query from it. You could leave it on S3 as long as your servers stay up and running, but at some point all of that will die. So you want to have a plan to extract that data, and where is it going to go when S3 is when you're no longer going to have those servers.
One more thing to hit here, and then we have a couple of questions. So let me just hit this chart of accounts real quick, and we'll get to your questions. The chart of accounts versus cost center, this is another prerequisite that you have to set up in Global HR. you go with one or the other, essentially. So if you take the chart of accounts route, you are mirroring your S3 setup and putting that into S3. This is for your GL, for your accounts, your accounting units, and your GL companies. If you take the cost centers, you have to set the same thing up in Global HR, but you have to kind of set it up into one field and then tell the interface what to parse out to map to S3. So we usually recommend that if you're already an S3 customer, you should go the chart of accounts route. There are exceptions to every rule though, so you should definitely take a look at this with your organization. The good thing about the chart of accounts setup is that if you, once you already have it set up in S3, you really just turn on an interface that will take what's in S3 and dump that into Global HR. So your GL, your finance users will still be using S3 as their system of record, and they won't have to do any maintenance in Global HR. The interface will do all the adds, changes, deletes for them for all that accounting structure. So we have a couple of questions here. The first one is, will changes to taxes be tracked? So I guess that's in the audit log.
Well, taxes, all your taxes are tracked in your payroll system. So everything, what happens in Global HR is your resource record, what happens to your employee while they're throughout their life cycle in your organization. So they're hired, that will interface a record, an employee ID, their tax date, all of those things into your payroll system. They have a position change, they have a new pay rate, that gets interfaced over into the system. So there's not a bi-directional from payroll. I can't say that because if any of you were sitting in our benefits presentation a few hours ago or an hour ago, we do bring a couple of things over into benefits, some hours worked and those types of things. But for tax purposes, that still stays in your payroll system, and just any of those changes need to be interfaced and mapped over.
Any changes to the employee record or resource record, though, like their address or their location on their work assignment, that will be tracked in Global HR and the audit log. But yeah, all the tax stuff is going to live with payroll in S3. Another question, if we're coming from S3, why would our org structure change? Wouldn't we want to just mirror the existing structure? You might very well want to mirror the existing structure. If you have it and it's working well for you and it makes sense for your organization, then you can just use those conversion programs and pull everything over that you already have. The fact that the org units are, you can have multiple levels for the org units really just gives you some extra flexibility in case you did want to change the org structure.
And this is really a good time to reevaluate your organization. Back when Lawson was set up for S3, you were kind of limited to fit your organization into the confines of what S3 allowed, and that was a very hierarchical organizational structure. A lot of organizations do not work that way, and if you want to be able to expand things or move different reporting structures around based on where they truly fit, not so much where S3 makes you put them, this is the best time to do it. That's one of the things we recommend. You may end up doing it the same way that it's working now, but just to ask all the questions to ensure that you're utilizing all the functionality and capabilities and the flexibility that Global HR allows.
This is a huge project that you could could tackle now.
Sorry, I think we've got...
It's work assignments, so I want to hit it in conjunction with the positions. And we can go ahead and hit the question now. We have a question from a school district about how clients would deal with multiple work assignments that are funded by different sources. So because this is from a school district, I'm thinking maybe contracts. Maybe this would be grants or contracts.
Yeah.
So there is grant functionality in Global HR, and you do also have employee contract functionality in Global HR.
Teacher contracts.
Yeah, teacher contracts. So you can set different contracts up with end dates. So if your contracts have multiple or if your employees have multiple work assignments that are related to different contracts or grants, you can track that on the work assignment. In addition, if it's not contract or grant driven, you can each work assignment, just the way it works in S3, each work assignment will have its own GL structure tied to it, just like on your PA13, your multiple positions. You'll still be able to send that back to the correct place in the GL structure. So it'll work very similarly to S3 today. If we didn't answer your question, feel free to type back in, so while we talk about positions now, we can hit that more. Did you have anything to add to that one?
I was thinking of something and I just lost it. So.
We'll talk about jobs and positions for a little bit, so feel free to jump back in. So positions and jobs is a huge thing that could take up a lot of your implementation time if you don't have that ready to go. You may have your positions and job structure all set and you're happy with it in S3 now, and that's awesome. We run into a lot of clients who have been meaning to clean it up for a while, or they want to change their whole structure. So I would start at least looking at doing that now. If you don't have positions to begin with, you need to implement them, because global HR functions with positions. You cannot just use jobs. You really need those positions in there. In addition, your relationship between your jobs and your positions should be one to many. You shouldn't just have, you can, but you shouldn't just have your jobs equaling one position tied to one employee, because that creates a lot of extra work to maintain that position. Again, it's doable, but it's not something that we generally recommend. You might have one-offs where you are really the only person that does that job, that position. So yes, those would be parallel. But for the most part, if you kind of can bucket those jobs or those positions under one job, that will save you a lot of cleanup time.
And with reporting, it helps a lot with reporting.
Yeah, very true. So the way I like to start a job and position cleanup is with the jobs. You start at the job level and determine what makes a job unique. And again, you may already have this defined, but maybe a job is unique by the process level that it's in and the title and the exempt status maybe. So just take all those components of a job and make sure that there are no two different jobs that have those same components that really should be together. Like maybe you have two different managers that really could be consolidated into one job. Then once you have that consolidated, you tie on a spreadsheet, tie that to your position records, and then do the same thing for the position. Determine what makes a position unique. Consolidate any positions, move your employees into them, because whatever beautiful cleanup that you want to move into global HR will still have to interface back into S3. So you need to feed like items. You need to feed what's in global HR to something that already exists in S3. In addition, when you move to global HR to begin with, you can use the conversion programs to pull out of your S3 system. So it's so much easier if you already have it built and ready to go in S3 to move it right into GHR when you're ready to implement or begin your implementation build.
And the mapping stuff that Jackie is talking about is in S3 under the TM system code. So it's for talent management.
LT.
Or, thank you. LT.
Sorry.
The LT system code. So that's where you would say, this position or work assignment in talent management or global HR maps to this one in S3, and same thing with the statuses. So there is a mapping element to ensure things aren't just kind of going over and, crossing your fingers hoping that it matches to what you want it to match.
One of the last things we have on here is clean up your jobs and position classes. So if they're already clean, great, but just note that in global HR, there's a lot of extra classifications. You have categories, subcategories, which are different than your EEO categories. That's tracked elsewhere. So you have categories, subcategories, families, and levels. So you have 4, well, I guess you could call them 3 additional places that you can classify jobs. So if you need to do that for extra reporting, or if you've always wanted to bucket it a different way, this really drives some reporting. So if you want to do that, start thinking about how you would classify those now. And the same goes for positions. You have the categories, subcategories, levels, and families there too. And then along with your jobs and positions, this one's not as major, but if you do need to clean up your location, sometimes we go places and the locations are a little bit sloppy, or maybe they're supposed to be driving the position, but they haven't really been, and they just need to be spruced up a little bit. This is generally a pretty quick hit. You can usually find out where people are and just clean that up on the position record or wherever it sits. Maybe it's just on the employee record itself, but that's a quick hit. You can go ahead and take care of that. Inactivate any obsolete locations. Maybe you closed down a satellite facility a long time ago and you never got rid of that. Inactivate any of that so that we don't bring bad data into global HR, because you really won't need that moving forward.
Okay, so this kind of ties into one of the questions that we got a couple of minutes ago, and that is really about what the reporting relationships go to. So, in global HR, you are not, again, limited to that hierarchical supervisory structure. You can have multiple supervisors for one employee, and that might not necessarily mean multiple positions. You can definitely do that. You're not limited to having a primary manager being the only one that's able to action on the employee and manager self-service. Any manager that has access or has a supervisory role over that employee is able to do what they need to do for them. You are also able to have the same role, but different people manage person. So healthcare is a great example because you have nurses that might have a weekend supervisor, a night supervisor, a daytime supervisor, holiday, and 5 different people might supervise them at any time during, a pay period or during a month. You are able to give all of those managers over that employee a role and put them in the hierarchy. So again, you're not looking at a top-down siloed type of hierarchy. You can create it as it actually matches what your organization does. So what we have here is we're creating levels, and Jackie talked about levels with positions. We kind of talked about levels with organizational units. This kind of goes throughout the system. You're able to say, match any item in the system, organization, unit, supervisor, position, with like items. So that way they are on the same level. So if I've got all of my administration types of positions, they may have different titles, but I can put them all as a 5, which means when I look at an org chart, they're all going to be lined up together as a level 5. There may be, a director at level 2 is called a director, but maybe in another department they're called a VP, and they can be at that same level for your structure. So there's a lot of flexibility, and that's another good reason you really want to take a look at what your organization actually does, not in the system, but kind of on paper in real life, how those reporting relationships work. You're also able to create security around specific things that you want a supervisor to do. So maybe somebody's not a true supervisor, but they do the performance appraisal for the employee. Or maybe they just assign goals to the employee. You can give them a manager role and just assign security to appraisal access or goal access or any of the talent management modules that they may do something with. So that's all they see. They wouldn't be able to terminate the employee. They wouldn't be able to do any kind of position change, but they'd be able to see the information they need to see and action on just those items for you. So hopefully that answered the question that came through about supervisors.
I think it answered this one too, if you want to just take a second and read that one.
Yeah. Can you?
So while we're looking at the screen and while Melissa's checking out that question, I want to just point out, so this is, it's probably a little hard to see, but this is where you define the type, and then you have your roles, your counts, so this is kind of like a quick reporting, and then this is the actual structure itself. This is where you'd actually define like the HRO 7 type structure. And then over here is a chart, which is like the tree, so the organizational structure. You can actually look at it visually, and which a lot of times people ask for. They like to be able to see that reporting structure.
And it's available in the manager self-service as well. So it can be hidden if this is something that you don't want to roll out, but out of the box you're able to, and you have your supervisory structure set up, you're able to push out the organizational chart on manager self-service as well. This is back office. And yeah, I think we got
all the supervisor
questions. I believe so.
All right, this is another major project that a lot of clients don't think they have competencies, but you probably do have them somewhere. So we like to ask clients to try to build out their competencies in preparation for Global HR before we get moving on the project, because it'll save a lot of time. So Global HR is really driven by competencies on the employee, on the position. If you're looking at succession management, you need to have these competencies to find the percent fit, or what an employee would need to have if they needed to move into another position or a future position. So competencies, you can implement Global HR without them. You absolutely can, and you can implement them kind of as you have them prepared and as you're ready to go. But in order to get the full functionality of Global HR, we really recommend that you use competencies from the get-go if possible. So this is just an example. This is just a job description that we pulled off of our own server. I think and it shows you it's in Word format, and it's, sentences written out about what needs to happen for that job. A lot of clients just have this as a starting point. So you may think, I don't have any working conditions. I don't have any skills. You do. It's just kind of like hidden in your Word format job descriptions. Pull them out, start pulling them out now and turn them into codes so that you can upload them into the system. You may have some in S3 on like your PA20 or PA22 that you forgot about. Maybe you used to use them, you don't use them anymore. So that could also be a good starting point. But if not, go through your archives of your old jobs, whatever's being posted out on your job boards. That'll give you a start on what you need to put into the system. You can also look up like OSHA codes online for your working conditions. Just get a start of what you have and get that in codable format so that when you move to Global HR, you can go ahead and upload those and tie those to the position, the job, and the employee level.
And Infor has just started offering packages for different verticals. So I know they've got healthcare competencies that are available to purchase. So if you have nowhere to start and you don't have, because competencies are a little different than KSAs. So you may not know where to start. They may have something you might Google, competencies for whatever your organization does, school districts, teachers, and find some good starting points there. But if, you're kind of under the gun, you're in the middle of, design right now and you want to get competencies out there, you can go to, and we're not Infor salespeople, but just want to let you know that is a resource that is available.
Next, we're going to talk about actions and action reasons. So Melissa alluded to this a little bit before. Over there on the right-hand side, I have the delivered action requests in Global HR. This is just Global HR. It doesn't count talent acquisition. I think I might have a position budget action up there. But this is what's delivered in Global HR. As you can see, there isn't a ton. So what you should start to do in S3 to prepare you to move to these fewer actions is consolidate, clean up similar actions in your S3 system. So I've worked with a client who had multiple merit increases, and they had one for every date that they did a merit increase. We don't recommend doing that. Just have one and then have an action reason to give context around why that's happening, and then use the date function or the audit functionality to see when this happened instead of dating every action with the date that you performed it on. You can also probably find some actions that aren't being used anymore. So run a PA 340 with the date parameters on it and see what hasn't been run in the last year or so, and go ahead and inactivate that. That way it doesn't come up when managers or back office users are trying to take action on an employee. They won't even see that action to choose from. Then you can tie your actions to your your reasons to your actions. So if you're used to going into the PA52 dot whatever and trying to sift through all your action reasons, good news, you can use the PA57.3, I believe it is, to tie the reasons that are defined for certain actions to those actions. So if you have all your term reasons tied to your term, you just open up the reason section, and then say reasons defined for action only, and it'll only bring back those reasons. So it saves you a lot of time having to hit next to find the reason that you're looking for, and it saves some user error. So if someone doesn't know what to pick, they don't just pick something random.
But going back to what I talked about earlier, there really is 5 actions: hire, rehire, position change, pay change, termination. Anything else is a reason for one of those things that happens. You might have like a action, I want to say like a cleanup if there's incorrect information that was in there. So like action. A correction or an administrative action. And then the same ones for your manager self-service if you rolled those out, because you want specific ones so you can only tie reasons that managers can use to those. But if you have like 20 actions or 15 actions, that's way too many. You're most likely tying your reason into each of those actions, and not necessarily, they're not true actions on their own. And that will help with the mapping to what's out of Global HR.
Yeah, so the change relationship to org is one that's probably going to take a lot of your transfer is probably going to take a lot of your like promote, demote. Change relationship to org actually functions for like putting someone on leave, or if you have a contractor that you're tracking and then they become an employee, you would use a change relationship to org action rather than like a hire action, because they're already in the system. So you're not really hiring them and you're not rehiring them. So it's a little bit to get used to these this kind of terminology, but these are the delivered action requests in Global HR. So you can create custom action requests, but it's something that you're going to have to maintain. And it's a tech thing, like your IT guys would do that, or gals would do that. And so it's something that you'd have to maintain going forward. And really, this should give you everything you need, and then you can use the reasons to give it context around it. But you do have the flexibility if you do need to create custom ones as well. In addition, you should start thinking now about your approval levels. So within these within these delivered action requests, there are built-in approval levels that you can use. So maybe it initiates with the manager and then goes to HR, and then the director approves it as the final approver. You can change that. So that's a little bit easier to change than to create a whole new action request, but start thinking about that now. And then also start thinking about who just needs to know. So maybe a term happens, maybe pharmacy needs to find out, and the IT department needs to find out, and security needs to find out to deactivate access to certain things. So think about who needs to get these notifications so that when you start to go through your design process, you can really articulate that to your implementation partner, who needs to see what. I think we have a question before we go too far about the status codes on the chart, so the org chart. So when you create status codes, again, you create the relationship to org, the relationship status, and the work type. And when you create those, you can specify whether they are included in head counts and whether they appear on the org chart. So if you have someone who, I believe this question was about severance, so if you have someone who's in severance and still receiving pay, or you have someone who maybe you don't want your contractors to appear there for some reason, you can exclude them from the org chart and from appearing in head counts too.
And generally, the people that are on severance and not still benefits eligible are generally in some sort of term pending role. So they haven't gotten the last paycheck, and they're still getting benefits, or they're still being deducted from their benefits, are still being deducted, contributions deduction still happening. So generally those terminated statuses wouldn't show up on your org chart anyway. So you could create one that's like a terminated pending type of status for those.
This next question, I don't know if I know the answer to it. We might have to.
I can try.
Okay.
Phone a friend. We currently do a lot of reporting using Microsoft Access with ODBC connection. Will we still be able to access information on the tables in GHR using ODBC? That might be a phone a friend. I know it's the tables in Global HR backend. It's not a relational database. So ODBC is the connection, but you wouldn't be able to do any kind of relational database SQL type queries because the structure is completely different. So I might have to follow back up on what.
We might have a tech webinar coming up soon.
Do we have one today?
Okay.
Yeah, so
we'll have an answer at the end.
We'll message somebody right now, and then.
The question is, can you create an Access ODBC connection with Landmark?
Mm-hmm. And query the GHR business classes.
And what?
Query the GHR business classes.
All right, you're up.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if there's any more questions. Okay, so we've got employee groups. Employee groups, we talked about earlier today, are now going to be called custom groups. You don't want to bring over, like Jackie was saying, a lot of either redundant information or things that are that should be inactive, things are not being used. So sometimes people have a ton of employee groups, and a lot of times they're needed. A lot of times maybe a lot were created before somebody got there and they weren't sure if there was one created for them, so they just went and created a new one anyway. So there's where the redundancy falls in. So you just might start chunking them and deciding to go through all your LP employee groups and validate that they're being used, that they're needed. If there are some that are not needed, you will need to inactivate them. but you'll need to remove the criteria so it drops the employees before you inactivate them. So there's a couple of steps behind doing that. But this is, again, going into the system with clean data and valid groups, and so you know exactly what you have out there. So let's see, inactivating, and then just determine which of those will be used in global HR. There is benefits in global HR, there is absence management in global HR, so you'll bring those across. You'll bring any HR-related employee groups across. The only ones that most likely will not come back will be any payroll-related groups, because those are still going, payroll will still stay in S3.
So we have another question that I think I'm going to hit now before we move into employee self-service and manager self-service.
Okay.
The question is, what about actions that update user fields? So if we can, let me just go back real quick. So again, these are your delivered action requests. You can add additional fields to these delivered action requests, again, a little bit more easily than it is to define a whole new action request. So user fields, if you can't find an existing place for them in global HR, you have to use your configuration console, which is kind of like a more user-friendly way of customizing the system. But you'd have to use your configuration console to create these user fields, and then you would, again, in configuration console, tie these those fields to these action requests. You may really find a reason to create a whole new action reason, so I don't want to discourage you from doing this entirely, but we try to push everyone towards using what is already out there, so you don't have to do that extra configuration customization there. That should answer it. Do you have anything to add to that?
No.
Alrighty.
That's good.
Into ESS and MSS.
Okay, so if you've not rolled out employee and manager self-service, we suggest you do it. There's great return on it, and that's a big driver. A lot of what you will see and offer to your employees in global HR is through the employee and manager spaces or self-services. So especially if you want to use the performance and goal management, if you want to use compensation to do merit increases, all of those things will need your employee and manager self-service. There's different ways you can do it. If we can go to the next one. We can phase it out. You know, you don't need to do a big bang and have everybody at one time. If you're nervous for, you know, people are used to calling HR, this is the way it's always been done, they don't like getting on the computer, that's fine. You can roll it out view only and just let employees and managers see the information, see their own information, see their direct reports information, and start driving them to use it. Just because it will, even if they're not updating it, if they know it's out there, they might be more, they might use that over calling HR if they know the information is out there. Or you can do it by process level or department. Maybe, you know, your back office users like your HR, finance, and IT, they're on the computer all the time. Phase one is roll it out to them, because they will give you the feedback on, you know, what might help rolling it out to the general population. So there are a couple of different projects you can do, but I would definitely suggest getting that out and getting your population used to being in self-services before you go to global HR. And to get ready for global HR, say you do have employee and manager self-service rolled out, or one or the other, or we'll be doing that pretty soon. Some of the things that you need to think about is there's some new functionality, and what kind of functionality might you want to roll out with your core global HR. So you've got your implementation project, you're going to do core global HR, you're going to do employee self-service or employee space, maybe not manager space, but in that employee space, what are the pieces that you want to go out to the employees phase one? And so a couple of the things, transition tasks, that is when you hire somebody new or you have an incumbent that is moving out of a position and training somebody to do all of their position, you would assign transition tasks to that person to ensure that the new person is trained up before they leave. Development activities, any courses, shadowing, anything that they need to either get started with their job. You can create a development checklist that would get with through all of the onboarding tests that they need to do, or any kind of training that they need to do throughout the year for certifications and to stay compliant. If you want to roll out performance and goal, and you want to have your appraisals out there in employee self-service for the employees to do their own appraisals and managers to be able to push that out to them and have that approval process going back and forth, or have the flow going back and forth as people finish pieces of the appraisal. Requesting goals, and then if you're planning on using the talent acquisition module, if you are going to be rolling out the internal job functionality. We talked about competencies. That's another place that's utilizing the competencies. Who do you have internally that might work for a position before you even push it out externally? Because you might have the talent in-house that you can keep your employees engaged and keep them moving around where they may want to go. And will benefits enrollment be initiated by employees? So if, life events, or if anything happens, will you need them to change their enrollment online? Do you want that functionality to roll out before open enrollment? And then we talked about thinking about your supervisors differently. Who all needs access to a certain employee? Do you want your supervisors to be able to do compensation changes? Do you want them to be able to search or create new job requisitions if you have talent acquisition? Search for those internal candidates and be able to assign goals for your employees. And then we've got learning budgets in there, which is also part of the development module. If they get a certain amount of money that they can disperse among their employees for training.
Here we have another project about just using your existing functionality. So we touched on this in a few things, and in addition, in how Melissa talked about the self-service places in S3. We recommend and we encourage you to go ahead and use the existing functionality that is in S3. So if you are starting to build out your competencies, you're starting to maybe set up your education institution degrees, use the places for that in S3 right now. Go ahead and already track that online. You can start tying it to your employees if you're ready to do that processing. And then it'll be an easy place to pull it out of, and maybe in some places you can even convert it out of S3 into Global HR. Makes it a little bit quicker. It helps you get used to using these things so that it's not so much of a huge change when you eventually do move to Global HR. In addition, if you have Smart Office, I think it was free a couple years ago. They gave it out at some point. A lot of people just have it sitting on the shelf. I would say go ahead and let your users use it. Go ahead and open it up to them. It's very similar in the user interface to how Landmark functions. So it'll get them used to getting in that kind of canvas-y area, get them used to the process boards and the way they search for things now.
Being able to easily export everything to a report.
Very quick reporting in there. Mm-hmm. And then again, just to repeat, try to maintain all of your data in Lawson S3 rather than on spreadsheets or wherever else you may keep it. Utilize that existing functionality in S3 so that it's easy to pull it when you do move to Global HR. Another project here is to prioritize your conflicting projects. So maybe you have an old project that it's now time to do it. It's back from the grave and you need to do it. You really should do it before you move to Global HR. Start thinking about that before you really take on a Global HR project. Or maybe you have benefits plans or absence plans that you need to put in by the first of the year, or things are changing and you know that it's going to take some of your IT resources away from this Global HR project. Start thinking about what you're going to do if they need to happen concurrently, or if you can backfill certain positions so that you still have the FTE helping out with the Global HR project. Don't be surprised. Don't go through this implementation and suddenly half your resources are taken from you because of something that needs to happen with the budget or something to that effect. So definitely prioritize your projects. Maybe you have to push Global HR off of because something else is happening in your organization, but it's better to be prepared than it would be to kind of slam the project in.
Okay, before I get to my wish list, we got a comment or an answer for the ODBC connection. Chip, one of our technical gurus, has responded to us. So he said, yes, it is a database like any other database. You can use an ODBC on it. The joins will be different and there's no data structure documentation. So there will be a lot of hunting and pecking. And historical data is really tough to get to. So that's the answer to that question.
Thank you, Keith.
Go Chip.
And thank you, Chip. Okay, so develop a wish list. So that's kind of the next thing is not thinking about this as an upgrade. It's kind of positioned as an upgrade, it's priced as an upgrade, V11, but it really is a re-implementation. And if you put if you implemented S3 years ago, 10 years plus, your organization may have changed since then. So think about where, what your pain points are. Where is it that you find you're spending a lot of time? Where are there manual processes? Where are there things that you wish the system tracked, but it does not track? So start listing all of those things and then begin thinking about, automation. There's a lot of functionality already built into the system. A lot of those workflows are already built in. Email templates, notifications. Think about all those times you reach out to your employees and when they are, when you send emails, when you send letters, and start mapping those out because those are most likely out of the box in global HR, so you just want to turn those on. And then don't be afraid to dream big. System is only limited by what you can think of. It's ones and zeros. And your resource constraints. But the way I think about it with a programming background is it's ones and zeros, and it can do anything you tell it to do. And the configuration console tool really allows you a lot of leeway in creating and configuring the system to work the way you need it for your organization. So kind of throw away what you know of S3 right now and just say, if I could do anything with my HRIS organization or my company, how would I want it to look? And you can get started from there.
So those are all of our projects. Maybe that's too much. Maybe you can't handle that all right now. Some of the main things that we would say you should definitely do before you open up or start a global HR project is definitely look at your jobs and positions. Start getting that cleaned up because that can be kind of a bear and it can start to eat away at a global HR project if you do need to clean that up and you don't realize it until you've started working through global HR. Also think about your supervisors, maybe in conjunction with your positions. Your supervisors need to be cleaned up as well. So if you're going to be using manager space, you'll really want your supervisors in good condition there. And then in addition to your jobs and positions, pick another cleanup project. So maybe you're implementing the OC Health module and you don't have all of your health components figured out in S3 right now. Pick something else that you will be able to really knock the ball out of the park in when you implement that module in global HR. And then again, prioritize your projects outside of global HR. Make sure you know what's really going to be a conflicting project or what might kind of need to be done beforehand to make global HR that much better. And also think about your wish list. Start dreaming. And those projects outside are not only HR projects. Think about your IT resources that would be needed on the implementation. Mm-hmm. If they're going through an Epic project or they're going through some other, Kronos or another big implementation on one of your other lines of business, they're not going to be available for your implementation. So put that on your roadmap when you're thinking about when the best time would be for global HR implementation. So I think we've got another question here. It is, if only 1 year of history is brought over, what is the recommendation for history data in regard to record retention requirements that could go back a very long time? So great question. And that really is utilizing whatever your legacy system is. So if it's, the S3, keep it in there, or move it into a data warehouse, or move it into an Access database. You can move it again if you need to have it for record retention purposes. If you needed to have it 10 years back, you would just need to plug that into your budget and your timeline to be able to archive all of that history and convert it into global HR. Mm-hmm. And it's just not loading it up there. There's a lot of effective dating. Jobs have to be there by a certain date before employees come into them, mm-hmm. and supervisors have to be available by a certain date in order to be assigned to employees potentially at different points of the timeline. So there's an art form to trying to convert history in, and it definitely does take a long time. So just be very aware of that. Another concern I've had at a client before is how to rehire someone who termed prior to your history cutoff date. So if you had someone term 5 years ago and you only brought 2 years of history over, what do you have to do to get them in global HR? And I talked to someone in Infor, I've kind of thought it through myself, tested it out in our sandbox, and the easiest or the quickest way to do it at that point is to hire, term, and then rehire in global HR. And a lot of people don't really like that. They don't want to have to go through all those steps when you're just trying to onboard someone. So what we've talked about at my current client is just bringing over all employees.
Yes.
If you have hundreds of thousands of employees, maybe we should talk about that a little bit more. But if you really don't have, I think this client would have about 11,000 total termed and active employees. So we're just going to bring them all over. If they're older than a certain time period, we're going to put that like dummy position code on them so that it doesn't, if we really need to know, we can go into S3 and look it up. But that is another consideration that you have to kind of keep in mind when you do choose how much history to bring over. One more thing, I know Keith's trying to step in.
I like to get in front of the camera.
Sure, please do. I thought about the action requests again. So we talked about the delivered action requests and we talked about the user fields there. When you go through with your implementation partner to look at the action requests, you're going to go through every delivered field that's on that action request and decide at each level, the initiator, the initial approver, and the final approver, whether you want them to even see that field, whether you want them to be required to fill it out, or whether you want it just to be visible and or enterable. So yes, they are delivered action requests, but you can customize them a little bit without having to generate entirely new action requests. So you do have a little bit more functionality, and you can add those user fields to it as well.
So before we close, I want to add that we're big fans of Global HR. We think it's great software. We think it's great functionality. But as consultants, what is rewarding is successful projects. It's the secret of consultants is we don't just want to do the work, we want to feel good about the end result. And the single biggest variable for us is client engagement, the ability to commit resources, and how prepared they are, right? How prepared a client is for this project makes a big difference in its success. So, if this is something you're looking at, we would actually recommend, contrary to what your Infor rep probably says, not to rush it and to look at two things that are very important. One is, it's going to take time and money. It's a big project. If you're an average organization, you're looking at 9 to 12 months just to get the first core piece in. It's going to take consulting dollars. It's something that you're going to probably have to get budget approval for. Shameless plug, we can always help make that business case as part of an assessment, but it's a process that you should start working on. And then the other side of that is just getting ready. So a lot of the stuff is aligned with getting the underlying stuff ready. But there's a lot of training classes that you can attend from Infor. There's a lot of information out there that can get you up to speed. So, if you know this is something that you're probably going to end up doing a year or two down the line, you should really start looking at it. You should really start looking at that budget. It's not a simple thing. It's a robust improvement of our system. You're going to get a lot out of it. But as an organization, I think that the more you understand and prepare for that, the better you'll be. And maybe at some point in time we'll have a webinar that digs more into like the nitty-gritty of what a project looks like and what the pieces are. Yeah. And I wouldn't call it a full reimplementation because you are taking users that are familiar with how Lawson works, and you're sort of reimplementing a more advanced version of Lawson. So you're leveraging that political capital. It's a tremendous opportunity, but you do have the full life cycle, right? Planning, design, testing, integrated testing. So just stuff to keep in mind. And again, we put this information out there. We hope it's helpful to you. And obviously, we're interested in doing these big projects, but we're also happy to do the small projects to help you get there, to help you plan. Yep. So feel free to reach out to us, and hopefully we see you out in the community at the user groups. Want to point out that we have 3 more webinars tomorrow. We'll have a few more in December. rpic.com/webinar, so you can see what's upcoming. And YouTube, you can see what is already there. Jackie and Melissa have some great presentations, always very excellent. Thank you very much for taking the time to attend. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll close.